Grok 4 is smarter than almost all graduate students. Pick anything, and we're talking about questions that it's never seen before. These are not on the internet. The reasoning capabilities of Grok are incredible.
For centuries, the resurrection of Jesus has stood as one of the most debated and revered events in human history. But what happens when a powerful artificial intelligence is asked to examine it through the lens of one of the world's oldest biblical traditions, the Ethiopian Bible? Recently, Elon Musk's AI system, Grok, was prompted with a question about the resurrection account preserved in the ancient Ethiopian Bible. The response it generated wasn't just analytical. It left many listeners unsettled. So, what exactly did the machine discover? The AI question that opened an ancient door. When xAI introduced its powerful new artificial intelligence system, Grok 4, the goal was clear: to show the world just how far machine learning had progressed. This system was built to process enormous amounts of information: history, science, religion, culture, and connect ideas that might take human researchers many years to piece together. By scanning vast libraries of texts and data, the AI could uncover patterns and relationships that might otherwise remain hidden. During one public demonstration, the system was given a question that sounded surprisingly simple: what does the Ethiopian Bible say about the resurrection of Jesus? At first, the question seemed ordinary. The story of the resurrection is one of the most widely known events in Christian tradition. For centuries, believers around the world have read the familiar account in the four Gospels: how Jesus Christ rose from the dead after the crucifixion, appeared to his followers, and later ascended to heaven. It is a story repeated in churches, sermons, and religious teachings across the globe. But the answer from Grok took a direction few people expected. Instead of repeating the well-known passages found in most Western editions of the Bible, the AI began drawing information from ancient manuscripts preserved in Ethiopia. These texts belong to a long and rich tradition connected to the Ethiopian Bible, which is maintained by the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. For centuries, monks and scholars in Ethiopia carefully protected and copied sacred writings in remote monasteries. Because of geography, language, and history, many of these texts developed separately from the traditions that shaped Western Christianity. As a result, the Ethiopian biblical tradition contains books and writings that many Christians elsewhere have rarely seen or studied. When Grok analyzed these sources, it did not simply find a slightly different wording of the resurrection story. Instead, it highlighted a broader narrative that extended beyond the passages most people already know. According to the manuscripts the AI examined, the period after the resurrection contained more teachings attributed to Jesus than what is typically presented in Western Bibles. Some of these writings describe conversations between Jesus and his followers during the 40 days before his ascension. In these accounts, Jesus reportedly shares deeper reflections about faith, warns about the dangers of spiritual corruption, and gives guidance about how believers should live in the future. For many observers watching the demonstration, the most surprising part was not the existence of these writings. Scholars of early Christianity have known about some Ethiopian texts for many years. However, academic discussions about them have usually remained within small circles of historians and theologians. What startled many viewers was how clearly the AI system presented the differences between traditions. Within moments, Grok compared the Ethiopian manuscripts with the more familiar Western biblical texts and highlighted where they overlapped and where they diverged. In doing so, the demonstration sparked fresh curiosity about a question that historians and theologians have quietly explored for decades. Could it be that important pieces of early Christian thought were preserved in Ethiopia while the rest of the world followed a different textual tradition? The possibility has fascinated researchers for generations. Ethiopia is home to one of the oldest continuous Christian communities in the world, with roots stretching back to the early centuries of the faith. Over time, its scholars preserved scriptures and commentaries in ancient languages such as Ge'ez, protecting them in monasteries often isolated from outside influence. Now, with the help of modern artificial intelligence, these long-preserved writings are being examined in new ways. What once required years of careful study can now be analyzed quickly, revealing connections that might otherwise remain buried in history. And for many people watching the Grok demonstration, the moment raised an intriguing thought. Sometimes the most surprising discoveries are not new ideas at all, but ancient ones waiting to be rediscovered. So, what exactly did the Scriptures say about the resurrection of Jesus? How important is it to the Christian faith? Let's dig into the details of the accounts of resurrection of Jesus. The resurrection of Jesus. The resurrection of Jesus stands at the very heart of Christian belief. According to the teachings of Christianity, God raised Jesus Christ from the dead on the third day after his crucifixion. This moment is seen not simply as a miracle, but as the turning point that transformed the sorrow of his followers into hope and faith. Christians believe that through this event, Jesus entered a new and exalted state of life as the Messiah and Lord. The story of the resurrection is mainly recorded in the writings of the New Testament. These texts describe how Jesus, after dying on the cross, was placed in a tomb. On the third day, however, his followers discovered that the tomb was empty. Soon afterward, several of his disciples reported seeing him alive. These appearances strengthened their belief that God had truly raised him from the dead. For Christians, the resurrection is not only about Jesus returning to life. It is believed that he was raised with a transformed and glorified body, no longer limited by the weaknesses of ordinary human life. Early Christian writers, especially the Apostle Paul, explained that this new form of life was powered by the Spirit rather than by the ordinary physical nature of the human body. Because of this, the resurrection became the foundation upon which the entire Christian faith was built. According to Christian teachings, Jesus' resurrection also marked the beginning of a new era in God's plan for humanity. After rising from the dead, Jesus is said to have appeared to his disciples and instructed them to spread his message across the world. This mission, often called the Great Commission, included preaching repentance, forgiveness of sins, and baptizing new believers. Soon afterward, Christians believed Jesus ascended into heaven. Within Christian theology, the resurrection is often described as the greatest mystery and the central truth of the faith. It is celebrated every year during the festival of Easter, the most important celebration in the Christian calendar. Easter reminds believers not only of Jesus' victory over death, but also of the promise that those who follow him will also be raised to life in the future. Christians believe that when Christ returns again, the faithful who have died will be resurrected as well. The celebration of Easter is historically connected to the Jewish festival of Passover, which commemorates the liberation of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. Early Christians saw a powerful connection between these events. Just as Passover symbolized freedom from oppression, the resurrection symbolized freedom from sin and death. Over the centuries, the resurrection has also inspired countless works of art, literature, and religious devotion. Many paintings, sculptures, and church decorations portray the dramatic moment when Christ rises from the tomb. Some people have also linked the event to famous religious artifacts, such as the Shroud of Turin, a cloth that some believe carries a mysterious image of Jesus' body. However, not all traditions agree on the meaning or even the occurrence of the resurrection. Within Judaism, the traditional view is that Jesus did not rise from the dead, and some historical explanations suggest that his body may have been taken from the tomb. Certain ancient spiritual movements, such as Gnosticism, believe that only the soul of Jesus was resurrected rather than his physical body. In Islam, the understanding is quite different. Islamic teachings generally hold that Jesus was not crucified, but was instead raised directly to God. However, within a smaller Islamic movement known as Ahmadiyya, some believe that Jesus survived the crucifixion and later continued his mission elsewhere. Because of these differing perspectives, historians and scholars often debate how the resurrection should be understood. Some view it as a matter of faith rather than historical investigation, while believers see it as the most powerful sign of divine intervention in human history. For Christians, however, the message remains clear. The resurrection of Jesus represents hope, victory over death, and the promise of eternal life. It is the moment that turned fear into courage and transformed a small group of followers into a faith that would spread across the world. What is the Ethiopian Bible about? Is it much different from other scriptural traditions? Let's delve into the details of the Ethiopian Bible. A larger and older scriptural tradition. Most Christians around the world today read a Bible made up of 66 books. This structure is the one most commonly used in Protestant traditions and is the version many people are familiar with. However, not all Christian communities use the exact same collection of scriptures. Some traditions include more writings. For example, the Catholic and Orthodox churches recognize several additional texts, often called the deuterocanonical books. Yet even these larger collections are smaller than the scriptures used in one of the oldest Christian traditions on earth, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. The Ethiopian biblical canon is unusually large, containing 88 books, far more than the 66 or 73 books found in most other Christian traditions. This includes 22 texts unfamiliar to many Christians worldwide, such as the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Book of the Covenant, and the Didascalia. These writings, rooted in early Jewish and Christian communities, circulated long before the modern Bible was finalized. Far from being later inventions, they were once widely known, studied, and used by early believers to explore faith, creation, morality, and spiritual understanding, offering a unique window into ancient religious thought. The Book of Enoch, for instance, was especially influential in ancient religious thought. It contains dramatic visions and symbolic stories describing the world of angels, the structure of the universe, and the ongoing struggle between good and evil. The book also explores themes of divine justice and the ultimate triumph of righteousness. Because of its powerful imagery and ideas, parts of its message influenced discussions among early Jewish teachers and Christian thinkers. Over time, however, different Christian communities made different decisions about which writings should be officially included in their biblical canon. As Christianity spread across various regions, church leaders debated which texts carried the highest authority for teaching and worship. In many Western churches, a narrower selection of books eventually became the standard. But the story unfolded differently in Ethiopia. Christianity reached Ethiopia very early in history, and over the centuries, the region developed a rich and unique religious culture. Because of geographical distance and its own historical path, the Ethiopian Church preserved a wider collection of sacred writings than many other Christian traditions. Instead of discarding these ancient texts, Ethiopian scholars and monks carefully copied them by hand, generation after generation. Monasteries became centers of learning where these writings were studied, interpreted, and passed down to future believers. As a result, the Ethiopian biblical tradition maintained a much broader scriptural library than what most Christians elsewhere would recognize today. For Ethiopian believers, these additional books were never mysterious secrets or forgotten relics. They were simply part of the living heritage of their faith. Families heard passages from them in religious teachings, monks studied them in monasteries, and communities preserved them with great care. In this way, the Ethiopian biblical tradition offers a fascinating glimpse into the diversity of early Christianity, reminding us that the history of sacred texts is richer, deeper, and more varied than many people realize. How ancient is Christianity in the history of the Ethiopian civilization? Are there any other scriptures linked to Ethiopia? Let's find out. A civilization that guarded ancient scriptures. To understand why Ethiopia preserved certain ancient texts while many other Christian communities did not, we have to look closely at the country's unique and fascinating religious history. Ethiopia adopted Christianity as early as the 4th century, making it one of the oldest Christian nations in the world. At a time when much of Europe had not yet widely embraced the new faith, Ethiopian believers were already building churches, organizing monasteries, and translating sacred writings into their own language. Christianity was not simply introduced to the region, it became deeply woven into the nation's culture, learning, and daily life. But Ethiopia's spiritual story reaches even further back in tradition. According to long-standing Ethiopian belief, the country's royal lineage traces back to Menelik I, who is said to be the son of King Solomon of Israel and the Queen of Sheba. This story, passed down through generations, is recorded in Ethiopian tradition and literature. Whether viewed as literal history or as a symbolic heritage, the story reveals something important. Ethiopians have long seen their nation as closely connected to the biblical world. This deep sense of identity helped shape how they valued and protected their religious traditions. Geography also played a powerful role in preserving Ethiopia's unique religious heritage. The country is filled with towering mountains, deep valleys, and vast deserts. These natural landscapes acted like protective walls, limiting outside influence for many centuries. While Christianity in Europe and the Mediterranean was being reshaped by political struggles, theological arguments, and cultural changes, many Ethiopian Christian communities developed in relative isolation. Because of this separation, Ethiopia was able to maintain traditions that might have disappeared elsewhere. In the Ethiopian highlands, monks in remote monasteries devoted years to meticulously copying sacred Ge'ez manuscripts, preserving them for future generations. This disciplined devotion safeguarded ancient texts that disappeared elsewhere. Notable sites like Lalibela feature extraordinary rock-hewn churches, creating sacred underground spaces that reflect the enduring spiritual and cultural heritage of the region. Another historic location is the ancient city of Aksum. According to Ethiopian tradition, the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest described in the Bible, is kept within a guarded church compound there. While this claim remains a subject of debate among historians, it reflects the powerful role that biblical history plays in Ethiopian religious identity. For centuries, Ethiopian Christian communities saw themselves not merely as caretakers of old books, but as guardians of a living and sacred tradition. Modern scholars have increasingly recognized the importance of Ethiopia's manuscript heritage. Researchers such as Ephraim Isaac have argued that many Ethiopian texts preserve traditions that may reach back to some of the earliest periods of Christian history. Similarly, the renowned scholar Getachew Haile spent decades studying and cataloging thousands of Ethiopian manuscripts. His work revealed just how vast, rich, and historically valuable this collection truly is, much of it previously overlooked by the wider academic world. Today, new technologies are helping researchers explore these texts in ways that were once impossible. Artificial intelligence, for example, can scan and analyze large numbers of manuscripts quickly, identifying patterns, connections, and linguistic similarities across documents. What once required decades of manual comparison can now be explored far more rapidly. In this way, modern technology is helping scholars uncover hidden insights within Ethiopia's ancient archive, bringing renewed attention to a tradition that has been carefully preserved for centuries. How much is the Ethiopian Bible different from other scriptural traditions? Is it globally recognized as a scriptural tradition in Christianity? Let's dive further into the details of the Ethiopian Bible. The teachings that continue to spark debate. Among the most fascinating parts of the ancient Ethiopian manuscripts are the teachings said to have come from Jesus after his resurrection. These writings offer a deeper look into what Jesus may have shared with his disciples during the 40 days before his ascension. According to several of these texts, that period was not only a time of comfort for his followers, but also a time of important instruction. Jesus is described as guiding his disciples carefully, preparing them for the difficult mission that would lie ahead. In these manuscripts, the message he leaves behind is strikingly simple yet powerful. Rather than urging his followers to seek influence, wealth, or political power, the teachings place strong emphasis on humility, compassion, and sincerity of faith. Jesus encourages the disciples to rely on spiritual guidance rather than human authority. They are instructed to spread their message not through force or dominance, but through kindness, patience, and the strength of their personal example. Some of the passages found in these writings also contain warnings about the future. They speak of a time when religion might be misused by certain individuals for selfish purposes. According to these texts, there would be people who speak loudly about faith and appear outwardly devoted, yet fail to practice the deeper values that religion is meant to promote. Mercy, justice, humility, and care for others, the manuscripts suggest, would sometimes be neglected even by those who claim to defend the faith. One notable work among these Ethiopian texts is the Didaskalia, which offers practical guidance for early Christian communities. Rather than focusing on power structures or rigid authority, it presents a vision of faith built on responsibility and service. The text encourages believers to take care of the most vulnerable members of society, including widows, orphans, and the sick. It also advises community leaders to live simple and modest lives, reminding them that leadership in matters of faith should be rooted in humility rather than status. Through these teachings, the church is portrayed not as a grand institution defined by power, but as a supportive community where individuals look after one another. The strength of faith, according to these manuscripts, lies not in public display, but in quiet acts of compassion and genuine concern for others. Another important theme running through these ancient writings is the nature of the human soul. Several passages describe the human body as temporary and fragile, while the spirit is portrayed as something enduring and lasting beyond physical life. Because of this, believers are encouraged to focus not only on external religious practices, but also on their inner spiritual growth. The texts suggest that faith should not become a mere routine of rituals or public performances. Instead, it is presented as a personal journey, one that involves awakening the heart and developing qualities such as wisdom, humility, patience, and compassion. True devotion, according to these teachings, begins within the soul and gradually shapes the way a person lives and treats others. Ethiopian manuscripts, preserved for nearly 2 millennia, continue to inspire scholars and believers. Their spiritual teachings spark global discussion, while modern AI tools like Grok 4 uncover hidden patterns, bridging past and present. These ancient texts reveal rich historical, theological, and cultural insights that still captivate and enlighten today. So what do you think about Grok's response to the question? Do you think AI gives a better understanding to scriptural traditions? We'd love to hear your opinions in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe.